So in this last video, I want to talk a little bit about technical interviews. And before I kind of talk about what this is for, why we're talking about this, I want to frame this a little bit. So many people that take 373 are really interested in a career in software engineering, or more broadly, something related to computer science, even if it doesn't mean something directly in the Allen School. If not, that's totally okay. There are many good reasons to take CSE 373 and ways to apply it in ways that you might not expect. So you don't have to be interested in a career in software. Maybe you become more interested. Maybe you really like the problem solving aspect or the coding aspect. That's totally cool. But we just want to spend a second talking about this because this does seem to be something we get a lot from students. They want to hear more about this. We want to make sure these opportunities are clear, especially to kind of like level the playing field. Even if you maybe don't know if you quite want this yet, trying to show you some places you might want to look. And just because I'm talking about software industry again, doesn't just mean this is the only thing you're able to do. It's just something that we highlight because it seems to be really popular with a lot of students. So if this sounds like you, someone that's interested in thinking about a career in software after they graduate, or maybe for an internship during their time as a student to see if that's something they like, it's never too early to start thinking about preparing for a job, internship, or hunt. We'll talk about this a few more times throughout this course about how the ideas we're learning in this course can be applied to something about like going to a job in industry or getting an internship. But I wanted to highlight a few places for you to get started because we're still in the middle of the quarter, and trying to help you kind of gather your bearings on like what does it look like to apply to one of these jobs, internship or full time. So usually when you think about applying to tech companies, this usually means the big tech companies, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, etc., but also the small companies, startups that are working in really exciting areas like biomedical health, or trying to, help with the homelessness crisis, to public sector, right? Lots and lots of places require technical interviews. And in software, that generally looks like the following. It's usually a two-step process, and this is really oversimplifying a complex process, which is you apply for the job, you interview for the job, and then you get the offer, or you don't. And we'll talk about that in a second. This pipeline, while it does sound very standard to most jobs, does usually take very specific forms in a lot of tech-related fields or in like computing-related fields. So applying, you might put together your resume, you might have personal projects that you might put on a tool like GitLab or GitHub, so you could show off your work. And you might identify which companies or which places you want to apply and when. And so that might involve going onto online applications or career fairs. I don't have a lot of advice right now on this, but I'll talk about it in a second. I'm going to link to a lot of resources on where to get good advice on how to build these things. These concepts aren't necessarily tied to what we're learning in 373. That kind of comes into the second step, the actual interviewing part, the technical interview, where really it's just an applied 373 exam. They have you practice with design decisions, using data structures and algorithms to solve real world problems, usually on like a whiteboard that you code on. It probably looks a little bit different now in the world where it's not safe to go into a place with a whiteboard with another person. But the idea is still the same usually, where you're kind of trying to solve a problem and they're kind of testing your ability to think abstractly, model something with an ADT, and choose a proper implementation that you want to tackle the problem with. And thinking how to, now that I've decided how to represent the data, come up with an algorithm to try to solve the problem that's being asked. So you'll find that a lot of the technical interviews you'll have here are really kind of stressing this 373 material, this stuff that we're going to talk about in this course. One thing I'll mention, I think a lot of times people over-optimize for the wrong part of what companies care about in the technical interview. There is certainly some aspect of this is kind of a test on can you code, can you solve problems. I think one of the things that's usually undervalued in a lot of the discussions people have about these technical interviews is a really important component here is communication. How do you communicate your problem-solving process out loud? How do you talk about ambiguity in the problem that you're given? Ask clarifying questions, take suggestions from the interviewer and work with them. I think that is actually such an important part of the technical interview process, that kind of speaking skill. And some people call that a soft skill, but it is part of the problem solving process. And so that's usually one of the things that you really should be thinking about when you're practicing is, how do I explain my thought process? It's not just staying up till 5 a.m. every night on websites practicing coding. That's not going to necessarily help you. That communication aspect is going to help you a lot. And then you get to the point where you might get a job offer or an internship offer, or you might not. Usually lots of students ask me, how do you get your first internship or your first job when every job out there or every internship requires previous experience? And my answer is, well, you usually keep applying places and you'll probably get rejected until suddenly you're not, and you landed your first internship. That's what worked for me. That's what works for most people. Most people have a period of time where they don't have a job, and then they do have a job. And usually searching for those jobs beforehand, you get rejected from places. And you usually don't hear about that because I'm not posting on my LinkedIn. I deleted my LinkedIn, but when I had it, I wasn't posting like, look at all these jobs I got rejected from. Just because you don't hear about rejections does not make them uncommon. They are very, very common. And so it does take a bit of grit, and it does take perseverance. But I do promise you that if you put yourself out there, you get practice, you will eventually get one of them. And it might take you a little while, and it's not going to be an easy process, but nothing that's worth it is an easy process, I think. But I want to make sure that we have some tools to talk about how we can best optimize to hopefully minimize those number of rejections to get you maybe that first job a bit sooner. So in that first step of applying, this slide has a lot of resources here that you can go peruse. I think this first one, that's probably the best in terms of kind of a starting point, is how do you write a resume? Most of these guides and resources are actually put together by the Allen School's previous career advisor, Kim Nguyen. She's absolutely fantastic. I'm very biased. I love her resources, so this is the thing I link to a lot. But she has a lot of stuff on kind of how you could put together a resume to best show off you, to make you look exciting. And there's lots of other resources here on kind of how do you tell a story, how do you talk with recruiters, and that applying step is that kind of really important thing. Now for that actual interviewing step, this is all the 373 stuff. Technical interviews love to ask you about data structures like maps, trees, heaps, using recursion. And they almost always ask you, once you code something up or you try to solve a problem, what's the runtime? How does this scale? And one of the biggest things is making design decisions. As I talked about earlier, a big aspect of these interviews is communication, talking about what are you doing and why, being able to compare and contrast separate ideas, form trade-offs between them, and then make an informed decision. You've been practicing this all quarter. You might not have been vocalizing that out loud in a setting where you've had to practice, but that is an authentic skill that you do need in order to be a successful programmer or a successful computer scientist. There are lots of places to practice these things in maybe some inauthentic environments like LeetCode or HackerRank or websites that give you lots of practice problems. It is not a bad thing to practice those things, but I do think it's really important to think about how you can describe this stuff. We also have a career prep channel on Discord, and I know Joyce has been, at least previously, has shared some things, and a lot of the other TAs are really excited about helping you out here. So if you want to talk about this stuff, definitely reach out to us on Discord. We're happy to help. Also, I want to really highlight one really great article, The Secrets No One Told You About Technical Interviews. This is written by a previous 373 instructor, Casey Champion. She is also really fantastic. And she wrote a great article on kind of like, what is this technical interview? What are the things that you haven't heard about it? And she has this perspective of being actually doing these interviews from the other end, actually interviewing people. So I really think that's a really great resource for you as well. The last thing we're going to post on the website is kind of an extra optional lecture, which is given by that Kim Nguyen that I talked about earlier. She's a former career coach at CSE, and this talk was specifically designed for students in 373. This is a talk that she gave a few quarters ago, back when lecture was something that happened in a lecture hall at UW. So if you're a bit overwhelmed of like where to start or what you should be doing, this is the place to start. I'll have this link on the calendar. Again, Kim is like one of my favorite people. I can't recommend her talks enough. I highly recommend watching that if that's something that interests you. So hopefully this kind of highlighted kind of some resources available, what these things look like, to kind of at least give you a language to talk about them. And please know, if you want to talk to us about this stuff, please reach out. We are happy to talk about this stuff if you want to. So that's all we have for today. I will see you all in class, hopefully, where we get to practice this heap stuff. And I hope you get to enjoy your weekend.